Folks, I'm very excited today, not for the reasons that, we are doing another podcast, another conversation. I'm actually happy for two additional reasons today. One is that I won my costume competition with AJ today. AJ started that, and then AJ was kind enough to concede. And the second primarily is I'm going to start this with an anecdote. So when AJ and I we were planning to have this podcast, probably 6 7 months back, and you have seen since then tens of podcasts from us. But when we were in that thought process, an expert came and told us that the problem with podcast is that there are so many of them, and AJ took the opportunity for the rejoiner, just kind of tell that person to f off. I remember the response that was primarily, we want to have fun, right? And we want to basically generate value for you who have been encouraging us since we have launched this whole series of borderless commerce. So today we are also delivering that promise. So what we have done today is what we have achieved to bring in the experts on psychology, behavior, how humans engage, react, and make purchase decisions and generally decisions. That's Sam with us. Sam has been with us in a previous conversation, founder of Cole Clarity. He has been someone I really look up to, and I think all of us in the commerce field who wants to understand what exactly is the behavior which leads to a final checkout, that they all could basically benefit from Sam's work. And then how all that psychology works, what's under the hood, what are the components in the technology which basically implement those behaviors and just causing them to move from one step to another step to another step and finally to the purchase decisions. So that is Umar, and the way we're going to basically marry this conversation is we're going to basically starting from the behavior, and then how do we basically implement those for those components. I'm looking forward to have a lot of fun with this conversation. And my partner in crime, AJ, is already here. And, he's a runner-up between the competition. Hi, AJ. Sam and Omar, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for making this exciting. And thank you for helping us to, deliver on our promise of bringing good conversation in. Looking forward to have a lot of fun. Thank you, folks.
Thanks for having us. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm going to open the conversation, right? The formal, the intro, the preamble, that's been done, but I got to have my attention kind of time as well, right? So I got to do that. But Sam, bringing it to you straight away, there is a brand and people, they always basically put up these projections. They always basically do some prediction. They always basically put together these systems, but the behavior is already and always it changes from the users, etc. I mean, why people behave, I put this, if I dare to say, irrationally, right? Why the prediction models, they always fail or keep evolving, etc. Why does that happen, Sam?
So that's a great question. So the question is really right, like why don't people always act the same way or act the way we expect them to,
Yeah,
rationally?
absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, rationality assumes that people have perfect information, right? Where they have perfect insight into the decision they want to make, or they're feeling, or all of the context around the decision, pricing, other products, all of those things. It also assumes that they have either unlimited or at least ample like mental resources, right? Like I can devote the time and energy to looking at all of the product comparisons for everything that I want, or every component of the shoes that I want to purchase. But the reality is that we all make decisions with incomplete information and under some kind of mental stress, anxiety, like I don't know, time pressure. We didn't sleep well. Maybe there's social factors going into it. There's a lot of external pressures that are constantly shifting, constantly changing that impact how we're making decisions. We make emotional decisions all the time, and then we rationalize them after the fact. Like, oh yeah, I was going to do that because of X, Y, and Z, when it may not have been really thought through ahead of time. One of my favorite examples of this is the research around judges in the US. The research happened in the US, and how their judgments get more and more harsh just before lunch. So that shouldn't
Oh,
happen, right? If you are making rational decisions, you shouldn't be impacted by quote unquote irrational or factors that happen that have nothing to do with the case. And of course, in that research, after lunch, those judgments are less harsh again. And so, like, we make these irrational decisions and it's shifting constantly because we're operating in conditions of uncertainty with limited resources.
so how. So in perspective, in commerce's perspective, how could brands basically understand and learn from these, realities or irrationalities? That's a tongue twister. How could they basically learn that? And Umar, I'm going to basically come later on to you that how do we basically resolve and address this from a technological point of view? But Sam, how do brands basically learn from that, um, and what to do from brands' perspective?
So that's the key point there is how do they learn, right? And so the first thing is they have to be willing to learn. In my experience, right, in Fortune 50 companies in the US, not everyone is willing to learn. They have a preconceived notion of what they think will work, and then they go forward with that. They don't measure, they don't collect data, they don't attend to data that is disconfirming of their original hypothesis. So they're not already willing to learn. I think the first point is they have to be willing to learn and willing to experiment, right? They have to measure the things that they're trying to change. They have to be willing to try the alternative. Learning should be the goal, like that gets you to the bottom line. The bottom line is not whether or not the marketing campaign was launched, whether or not the feature in the website was activated. It is, did we learn whether or not it works? And so I think to summarize, really, they have to be willing to learn, and then they have to apply basically the principles of science, of behavioral science, to what they're putting out into the real world.
Is it is it is it also the ability to fail fast? Because
Yes, I
I,
think
I
so. The ability and
I
the
think a lot of
willingness.
people. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, the ability and the willingness, right?
Yes,
You have to be willing to fail fast. And that can be very difficult when you have senior leaders who are saying, no, 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 this is my pet project. That trickles down, that impacts our psychology, our decision-making process, and can lead to very risky, very bad decisions.
because the reason I asked that is in the last couple of weeks the topic of playing as adults has come up numerous times in my conversations with people. And I've been fascinated to realise that lots of people want to play more, but it's now frowned upon as an adult. I don't mean like playing as a childish way, but taking on a project and trying and failing and having fun with it, rather than going, well, this is the way that we should do things. These are the 4 steps. Therefore, we'll run rote. For me, it's that whole: are we willing to learn? Are we willing to fail? Are we willing to have the difficult conversations that allow us to get to the greater output or the greater outcome, versus just saying, well, the preconceived idea is ABC.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fascinating area of research as well. Like, how do we encourage people to play with ideas, take risks, right? Do they feel comfortable to do that in their work environment with their leadership within the company direction, strategy, all of that? Yeah, I think that's a really good call, AJ.
Yeah. And Sam, if you put together fail fast, right? It's a very fascinating thing to say, of course, and it's a very fascinating thing to feel. I'm sure someone on the decision-making side, for example, we're talking about a brand, they would also love to hear this. But how do we quantify that? How do we basically put a system? How do we primarily put that time, money investment, and then, resources and investment into that? Because that's one thing. For example, from the technical standpoint, I don't know. That's my perception. Omar could shed more light on that. But when you're experimenting with a new set of technology, probably seeing if it works or it doesn't work, that might be quicker, right? Again, that's my opinion. But how do you basically put a process? How do you convince the decision maker that this must be the part of your willingness to learn, right? Whatever you're going to make as investment, etc.
That's depends on the organization and the decision maker in my experience, right? So at a large enterprise, one of the ways is having some internal examples of how that has looked, right? It's like, okay, we're about to launch this process, this product, and so we are going to think it through. We're going to go through each step and then map out essentially the assumptions and say, okay, well, these things need to be true in order for it to succeed. If you can, in the lead up to the launch, find, okay, well, these assumptions don't hold or they can't hold, right? You have already failed fast, right? You have already been able to say, like, okay, well, this thing can't work because these three things it's predicated on, they're broken and we need to fix those first. I'm, of course, coming at this from a efficacy of the feature, of the intervention, of the innovation on behavior. I think that can be very different than I'm sure what Umar is going to talk about and what his experience is as well. But I think those initial kind of wins of saying like, okay, you could spend 30 million on putting this out to everyone, or you could test it with, a small use case of like 500,000, right? Map out that trajectory. Those initial use cases and success stories have helped. I've also had success with getting decision makers to essentially make their decision early. Like, okay, we're going to pilot this. And if it comes back and we have this level, then we're going to scale. But if it comes below that, we're not. So they've made the decision before, let's say, the data is collected, right? So almost like pre-selecting the course of action when the results come in, it's already been made and you just follow course. I've also seen that work.
Omar, you're known, and the whole industry basically knows that you have broken so many things down because you have built so many things, right? I mean, relating to this question, right? The experimentation, fail fast, right? That's a very fascinating word. The same question to you. How do you basically instill this approach in the shape of a process? And a process primarily is that, there has to be some ROI clearly and could be planned. How do you do that? I mean, behavior is something some would say, fair enough, it's there, it's already been integrated into technology that's been built, etc. But just to read that, just to implement that, what does that take?
Yeah. So uh, let me answer this question, and then I would like to go back to a couple of conversations you were having, pointers to that. For me, so I've evolved relatively very simple mechanism for that. I was always following that, but recently I got to name it and put a nice structure to it as well. So what happens typically is when we talk about failing fast or any process, we typically monitor the lagging indicators. We always focus on the lagging indicators. We talk, okay, we try to build this, we try to sell this, it's not selling. We try to build this page and this page is not converting leads. But what we need to do is we need to, against every lagging indicator, we should potentially identify a couple of leading indicators. That is what I understood, that if you are able to identify leading indicators, you will always be able to take a decision much earlier in your journey towards failure, and you can pivot accordingly, or you can take a decision, okay, this is not going to work. For example, from a sales perspective, because I'm in sales now, as you know, in order
I
to
don't trust that, but anyway, please go ahead.
in order to close a certain amount of revenue, you need to have certain amount of leads coming into the system. Now that revenue is a lagging indicator, but leads coming in is a leading indicator. And then you even go beyond that. Okay, how many discovery calls are actually we having? So discovery calls becomes another leading indicator. Similarly for checkout, in order to have successful checkouts, you need to have people actually redirecting to checkout. So you need to monitor how many people are actually going to checkout. And before you take them to checkout, you need to basically land them on homepage. And so you have a trail of leading and lagging indicators. If you're able to build these into a system which monitors these, captures these data points, the possibility of waiting till you actually fail re- reduces significantly because you are able to take that decision much earlier rather than spending a lot of money. So this is the approach I had been recently following rather than waiting for actually fail some experiment. Why not identify as much as possible leading indicators, which is telling me in advance where I'm headed to. So that's the approach I typically take. Now, coming back to the conversation you were having earlier, even though I'm not
Can
the
I just
expert
jump in
of that, but I have.
can I just jump in and say something that I think is interesting about what you just said? You've talked about lagging and leading indicators, which I think is fascinating. But I also think that makes me think about KPIs or OBRs, whatever system you're using, and there's a range. And I think for me, the best performance that I've seen in both my businesses and the clients that I'm consulting with is when we use KPIs to outline the best outcome, right? Because you can say, well, look, the KPI is to get 3 sales a day, right? I was actually on a call 2 hours ago with somebody and I was saying your KPI should be to get 3 sales a day because that's going to help you get to this turnover figure, which means that this profit figure is going to matter, right? And we talked about what actions actually take to get to the three, to get to the traffic figures, to get to the collision rate, blah blah blah, right? I don't think a lot of people are using metrics in that way to say, right, is this an accessible metric that we should be tracking? How should we be tracking it? And is it leading or is it lagging? But also, what is the time period that we should be running that course over before we, like Sam says, shall we define it as right? We're going to try it for 3 months, and therefore, actually, we can't hit the KPI in 3 months. It's either a bad KPI, or it's something irrelevant, or we're not focused enough, or it's too high, or whatever. But actually, if we just say, right, we're running on this KPI because boffins in BI, our BI department, our business intelligence department, has said that that's what the KPI should be, versus the old Muhammad Ali quote, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth, right? It's that kind of thing, right? And I think, yeah, I think what you're alluding to is actually using KPIs for best practice, but also then setting a time period within that to say, right, when are we going to review? What does it look like? Success. And how can we measure it? Failure, right?
Exactly. So time period is definitely important. Checkpoints are definitely important. And essentially, every leading indicator is a lagging indicator for something else. And every lagging is basically leading for something else. So it's relatively more complicated when you actually start putting it in place. And that's where technology comes in. Because if you are trying to do it on an Excel sheet or a paper, obviously it becomes almost impossible. But when you're doing it with the modern BI tools, it becomes very easy to basically link all of these things. Regarding the earlier conversation, as I said, even though Sam is the expert of that, but my 2 cents on that, with respect to the irrationality of a decision making, I I believe that this is my point of view that human beings, when we tag them as irrational, it's slightly unfair. Why? Because our definition of rationality and logic is based on mathematical logic fundamentally. We assume that humans should operate like machines, calculating two, three, four, five factors. If we show them this, they should do this. That's the assumption. Whereas in a human being, we have a lot more variables. So if somehow we have the capacity to un- calculate all those variables or take impact of all those variables, every decision will become rational decision. So all we have to find out is how to actually measure all those not very apparent variables playing into the decision making metrics. So obviously, this is not something maybe fully technologically possible by now, but I'm a strong believer of technology, and I believe it's a matter of 1 or 2 years where we will be able to measure a lot of these variables. Some of them are already measured. So if you look at these large social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they are continuously monitoring your behavior patterns. And based on that, they are selling you stuff, selling you concepts, selling you ideas, and everything they want to sell you. And that is based on behaviors which typically is not possible to measure, but because of the way you consume content, the amount of time you spent on a particular video or a picture indicates something. And then the ability of these platforms to even listen to your conversations add to that mix of variables you can calculate. So yeah, that's what I think, that we should not tag humans as irrational. Yeah.
Omar, I think on the Sam, I'll take that bullet for you. Not for you. I think it was my own deed. I think the irrationality was kind of this is how I put this. What Sam said was primarily why are they not behaving the way they are expected to be, right? So coming to your
Expected.
five parameters, four parameters or five parameters. And I think this is very interesting, and I'm kind of, quantifying when you said in 2 years. Because for someone who's non-technical like me, I mean, I hear this a lot, in 5 years this would happen, in 2 years this would happen. So what is the evidence of that? A very general philosophical academic kind of a thing will be, oh, because the data, we are producing the data 10, 15 years back, or, and before that, we didn't have enough computing power to make sense out of it and bring in the AI,
No, no,
etc.
it's not
How
that.
would you?
It's sensors. It's not data. It's sensors. The ability of sensors to know you more as a human. If you have a different emotional state, your body temperature changes, your pupil change, your everything, your color of your skin change. The ability of these sensors to day by day understand you more, give more variables for a machine to compute and
But that's
understand
still
what you're
data,
going to
right?
do.
That's still data. I mean,
Yeah.
sensors
See,
are completely
Essentially,
all over the
machine
place.
for it's data for machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
see, I've been thinking about this a lot in the last 2 years since the explosion of AI. And the conclusion that I come to is I don't think there is enough data points, if you will. I can't think of a better way of putting this,
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
explains certain behaviour, and therefore I don't think so. I do a lot of strategy work, and I don't think AI is ever going to replace strategy because I think there's too much nuance involved, and there's too much colloquial understanding in the work that I do and the work that Sam does. I'm speaking for Sam, and he can disagree with me later. Right, that it's the nuance that the data points don't match. So for example, and this is something that came up twice today. A brand that I've been helping change owners, their conversion rate is stuck at about 0.35%, right? And they really should be at 2. And the reason is, and again, I don't have the data points to prove it, they're not posting on socials, they're not responding to reviews, they're not doing all of this stuff that we know from a psychological point of view actually indicates to customers that they are worthy of being trusted, they still exist, they're still in the market, but you can't prove that via data because how do you start to build up that picture? Whereas I can say from the psychology that I know and the psychology that I've studied and from being around successful merchants that all of these things have a secondary and tertiary effect on that conversion rate. And that's why I disagree with you, because I don't think there's no way to quantify those data points in a way that then allows us to introduce them into model. Just like, for example, I see this all the time on Facebook, and this will mean nothing to the three of you, but like, what do you call a bread roll? And it changes by county, even, right, or by geographical location within the UK alone, right? Some people call it a bread roll, some people call it a bap, some people call it a toasty, right? I'm making these up, but you understand. And there's no way to input that into AI or into some big data system that will understand that nuance in a way that me as a human does. And I'm sure even with Sam, if Sam was to go talk to a farmer in Milwaukee versus a farmer in Idaho, picking two random states here, they would be talking in a very different vernacular, even though they were describing the same sort of tools, same sort of process, the same sort of things, right? And therefore it becomes very, very hard for big data and AI to sort through that nuance.
Yeah, I think the the data capture point that you're making, Umar, is very interesting. And from my understanding, right, a lot of these models that are trying to predict human outcomes and human behavior, right? So a lot of my work was on like testing some of these AI algorithms, these predictive models on health behaviors. Things like I think there was a very famous example of the EPIC system to predict, I think, sepsis readmissions or something like that, and how problematic and difficult it was to do that because of the limited view into the data that goes into that behavior, that instance, right? And then I think also there's a lot of good research on predicting things like recidivism or who's going to predict a crime, right? It's like there is a lot of data and we can observe a lot of things about people. And then there is a ton of things that we can't measure about people,
Yeah.
right? And these models are not very good at doing that yet. And I think there's, that's an open question for the future. So that is interesting. The case that I think of, when it comes to predicting a crime is like you can have two different people, and one of those people, I think that the story was, they had a neighbor that like kind of like gave them grapes after school and like brought them in their house, right? And like, helped them do their homework. And so there was a bit of a social support, right? That was not a piece of data that could be captured, right? Whereas someone who looked just like that person, whatever, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, gender, all those things, right? Those things are in the model, those are capturable, but the blueberries and the nice neighbor are not. And that's the thing that drove the behavior. And so, and then you get into, well, even if you can capture that, that might be one data point, right? And these models, they're all probabilistic, right? How can you generalize from one data point to, whether or not someone's going to commit a crime? There's some interesting nuances there that we can debate and talk about later. I did want to also agree, leading and lagging indicators. That's part of what I was talking about when I talk about assumptions, right? And when a lot of behavioral scientists think about these things as like, what is the causal chain from the thing you're doing to the ultimate lagging indicator that you want to get to, mapping that out through those leading indicators, and seeing where does this break, and did you hit each successive benchmark along the way? And if it doesn't, then hey, you failed fast, right? Getting back to that. It's like now you can pivot. So yeah, I completely agree with the leading lagging indicator point.
Brilliant. So
I think Umar wants to talk. Go on. I'll
No,
shut
no, no.
my mouth.
No.
no, Umar, go ahead. Please go ahead.
No. So the only thing is obviously everybody have a different sense of things. So for me, I'm an optimist when it comes to technology. So obviously my general view for now is definitely I agree with whatever you're saying. Machine learning models as of now, AI as of now is not there yet. 100% agreed. And the data points are not there yet. Yes, I agree with that. For me, human beings are also machine. The only difference is they're chemical machines rather than mechanical machines. And anyone who have reasonable knowledge of psychology, obviously, I think all three of you have, we do understand that our behaviors are a lot that is coming from hormonal changes in our body and the interaction of those hormones and those chemicals, whatever is happening in our world. So anything that is measurable physically, maybe not today, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, I don't know. But eventually, most of the behavior will be cataloged, quantified, and then we would become very, very rational and measurable beings. Anyways, that's for the future.
I do not agree. This is an emotional comment. I do not agree with you. I do not agree with you, Wal Harari, right? I'm not gonna do that till my last breath. I'm not getting into that shit. I'm telling everyone. We are special, right? I don't care about evolution, the process that we got lucky, etc., etc. We had our, cousins, whatever. We are special ones, right?
You are special,
Sam,
sir. You are special.
Intelligent design.
That's a whole other debate.
you can kill me with these, educated academic terms, but we are special. Sam, this is something. So, Malcolm Gladwell, right, the famous author, David and Goliath, etc. Um, so I was basically watching a masterclass from Malcolm Gladwell, and he basically said something which is so amazing. I write at times. I have some aspiration of writing something, a book or poetry I do normally, etc.
A screenplay.
So, and then he said, start the finish, the end first, right? Define your goal first, and then, the backwards will happen itself. And that was so, eye-opening and said, that's really easy then, right? Even you could think as a thinker, as a creative person, maybe that, okay, if I have a goal defined and then you can work backwards. Now, but the problem with backwards is when you start implementing that, the backwards is not a continuous process. It will happen in chunks. Each chunk will write its own story with a certain goal, right? And when you work through it, in the case of a book, maybe chapters. In the case of a project, it will be your milestones. Each needs to be treated as, having its own goal. And whenever one fails, there has to be a fail fast kind of a thing there. Now, um, as a commoner, as an outsider from the technology and both behaviors realm, I'm asking that, if I'm a decision maker again, I want to basically implement a process of fail fast to basically address that. Because watch, whoever has made money from commerce till this point, they're gonna become dinosaur um, if they're not gonna basically look and fail safe new technologies, if they're not gonna experiment and try. So, how to build that process, being a scary, nervous decision maker, right? That's what I want to understand. And Umar and AJ, your perspective on that too. I mean, how do I do that? How a decision maker does that?
So that's a great question. I can tell you my experience and how I've seen that work at large organizations and small ones. I do think the willingness to test and experiment is key to it. Being willing to be wrong and having learning be the goal is like half the battle, right? Like if I worked with teams where they were like, no, we don't want to learn, we just want to ship this thing, right? And
Hmm.
so like that dynamic was a lot of the a lot of the work in getting someone to want to fail fast. I think so. There's the willingness and there's the aptitude and understanding of what it gets them, right? And so like I've seen teams be very successful with it when when their incentives are aligned, right? Like, so, if they do launch something and it doesn't work, and like the incentives are to actually learn what works, those teams did well. Um, Maybe you could bring play into this as well, because I also saw teams very successful when they had a lot of ideas, when they had a lot of you know, they've thought through that causal chain from the change they want to make, how it gets to that end, and then how they would potentially pivot. It's like, okay, well, if that breaks, then we can change this. We can go here, we can go there. And so I've seen a few different ways that leaders have enabled this process to learn. I think the willingness is key. I think being willing to think creatively and have a lot of ideas, and then having the time and expertise to think it through from start to end, right? Which is another thing we don't always have, right? We may have like, okay, well, you need to execute this quarter and you get these up, right? Like these outcomes up. So the context also needs to be there. Does that help?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah. What you said reminds me of. So it was on a Shark Tank called Barbara Corcoran, who may not be of any meaning to some people watching or listening. But I found what she said was really interesting. She made failing publicly one of her hallmarks of why she became so successful, because she was willing. And so what I took from what you were saying, Sam, is it's a cultural element of have you, which is why you're always going to be employed, by the way, right? Yeah, because you can't change culture just by overnight or just by printing some nice stuff on the wall that says we have a culture of learning and fear and achieving. Um,
Right.
I guess
Culture is huge. Good
probably
point.
yeah. I guess Umar probably has more to say about this than the three of us combined because he's built large organisations, right? Whereas we consulted for them. And so for me, I don't like the word culture because I think culture has become very nationalistic and very, very simplistic, right? In terms of how we think about culture. We think about culture being, well, we do the right things and we say the right things. And I think we've all probably worked in businesses where we go in and we've been hired by somebody that's incompetent and capable, and the reason that they've been promoted is they haven't rocked the boat. They haven't done they done what's required, but not what often is necessary. And therefore, I always come back to how do we create the culture of being acceptable to fail and it being acceptable for you to try, and there's no humiliation as long as you haven't harmed the reputation of the company, and oftentimes you actually haven't. Even if you have a minor blip, you haven't really, right? You've done some internal damage that can be patched up, can be worked through. And so for me, yeah, it's that cultural thing of how do we encourage people to try to fail. I think oftentimes we spend so much time training people on their jobs, not enough training people on to be leaders. We train people to be managers, and for me, the distinction is a leader says, "Well, what do you think the next step is?" A manager will say, "Well, the next step is," right? And I think when I've been around exceptional leaders, it's been really invigorating because they're encouraging you from the front; they're not pushing you from the back. And one of my favourite subreddits, I'll just throw this out there so everyone can go look at it, is LinkedIn Lunatics. And if you're not on there, you should be, because it's absolutely hysterical. But it is the worst of society who are posting on LinkedIn about management and about leadership, but none of them are leaders, they're all managers, and they're all pretty poor managers, right? Obviously, some of it is sarcastic, and lots of people don't have a sarcastic meter in their estimations of what some people are writing. But it is that they're poor managers, they're not good leaders. I think it comes down to how are you leading the business and how are you leading the cultural revolution within your business that allows you to create a culture and the understanding that failure is great, being able to be open and honest is great, being able to argue but be respectful, and then being able to promote because people have good ideas, not because they've worked there long enough.
With respect to this particular comment, building the right culture for an organization to basically be able to continuously experiment, fail fast, and keep on building stuff. So the practice
sorry.
Yeah.
So and I think on this one, AJ and I, we can testify that we have seen your teams, challenging each other without seeing that, who's a CEO, who is senior, who is junior. So that culture, we witnessed that, right? And then we saw the output, the productivity, and all good things around that. So yeah, that's important. Your perspective is really.
So how was this culture built? Very simply, when a failure happens in the company, we don't talk about, okay, we have a failure, any new ideas? No. The first step is why it happened. We try to understand why it happened. That's the step one. So lessons learned in a way. But the second most important thing is, because in my view, no effort is ever wasted unless you totally mark it as it's failure, close it down, let's start something new from zero. No, there is no zero to start again. Because if you've done an experiment, there is always something to learn from that experiment and take that to the next step. So when we say that, it's very easy. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that this is how it should be done, lesson learned. But how you implement it in the company is important, because if you make your team feel and understand that whatever they're doing, even if they're failing, if their experiments are failing, there is always some outcome from every failure, which is being part of the next success. So their confidence changes, because for them, that means there is as such no failure. There is as such no loss. Maybe we were supposed to achieve 80. We did not achieve 80, we got achieved 20, but that 20 is now a contributor to that bigger success. So every failure actually compounds the effect in terms of success. It gets added into the next process. That's the kind of culture we had in our company, or I was able to build in the company, which removed fear altogether. Because as such, there is no concept of failure, because there is no failure. So why fear anything? So that was, I think, the primary cultural element of the companies I built.
And Omar, if it's okay, do you want to talk about maybe any of the products, UnumPay, Jingo, whatever, and kind of, take us through that process, whatever you have said.
So let's take, for example, UnumPay. UnumPay is
Okay,
a
so
relatively
first,
recent product. We can talk about it.
yeah, so UnumPay happens to be right now by revenue, it's in millions of dollars. I cannot say, I'm not sure, legally. And the guy's here, right? He's gonna sue me straight away. It's so easy for
Can I check
So
something
So
else?
and in the financial services, it's probably, I think payment mediation, this is one of the
it's a
biggest
payment mediation platform. Yeah.
yeah, it's globally, right?
Yeah. So in case of UnumPay, how was it built? So it was uh, we thought, okay, this opportunity is available, let's start building it. And then some of the team members said, no, we cannot build it because it's something we do not have a license for. Okay, look, doesn't matter. Let's start building it. Let's put it live. And then we put it live without the license, and it started working. And then we realized that there's no license required for this. So from this example, if we think about financial services, everybody start thinking, oh, compliances, licenses, all of these things, and then they say, okay, let's pursue all this, and they never actually build anything. So in our case, we said, let's build it. We'll look at the compliances later on. Let's put it in production. If compliance stop it, we'll see that. Next step, we launched with fixed billing. Okay, good. But fixed billing is not working. Let's change to utilization based. No, 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 no. The whole market will respond. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. If somebody responds, we'll act accordingly. And we converted it to utilization based, and eventually it got converted. So these minor, small steps you keep on taking on UX, because when you're building a product, it's not like big decisions. It's a lot of small decisions that go into that on daily basis, which eventually lead to a successful product. And on a hindsight, it's very difficult to put all those in one place. It's very easy right now to talk about these things, but when you're actually going through those, you have to have that mindset. The organization have to have that culture of constant experimentation, and nothing is wrong, and no fear about failure.
And on UnumPay, I think it didn't come from Omar, you probably, when I was talking to few team members around that, right? So I think the moment UnumPay kind of, moved from one stage to another, there were bunch of, new rules, regulations were coming from Shopify, right? Which to my eyes basically is that UnumPay was able to basically teach on the compliances issue to Shopify, right? This was the way they were moving so fast, doing things, breaking, getting into that. And that space got more and more stricter for new apps and new products to come into that space.
Yeah.
So this was one, I think, real world kind of a product that did that. So
For example, Jinko, when we started with Jinko, we were simply building a seller center for marketplaces. But when we built the seller center for marketplaces, we realized, not the customer, if we build a seller center, who's going to handle the logistics? Okay, let's start building logistics. Okay, if we're building logistics, who's going to handle returns? Okay, let's start building returns. And we go to customer. Okay, we have now return functionality. Okay, returns are required. Yes, let's start using it. And you keep on building. You keep on. Some features we built, we never used. They were discarded eventually because we thought the customer would need it, but customer never needed them in the first place. So this is all part of the game.
and folks, Jinko, for whoever is watching, happens to be converted. It's an omni-channel e-commerce
It's an
platform.
omni-channel engine here.
Yeah. So and this product, or I don't know, almost started it as a pet project or whatever. It's now, I think, 200 people company, whole organization, one of the biggest in that region.
So the
Um,
important thing is not number of people. The important thing it is processing 10 million orders, e-commerce orders every month uh, in real time. And essentially, uh, recently a very large sale happened with one of the brands, 100,000 orders, single brand. And because of Jinko, they were able to deliver in 3 days.
wow.
That's impressive.
Wow.
The whole logistics and automation and everything.
And that comes from that culture that you built, right? The people are comfortable challenging each other. seniority, whatever. That's brilliant. Kind of, put sense for so many people, so many decision makers which are out there listening to this.
Yeah,
Um,
you work with my team and you understand that they don't care
yeah,
about designations
and,
and
and
hierarchy.
yes, exactly. They don't take shit, and it's a very open culture. And folks, this is one important thing, right? This apparently team is predominantly from a cultural standpoint where it's really hard to, how do I explain this, right? So culturally, we are taught to basically be respectful, even if somebody does not deserve it, right? So, respect, I mean, we come from that culture, and most of that team is from that background. So, be able to challenge everyone and everything, that is something kind of, takes an extra effort if you're working in that region, right? So, I can talk more about this for the reason I think that I work with the team, etc. But, just now shifting gears, um, I actually had something interesting. Of course, when I was working with the structure and the talking points, etc., can I came up with this that the technology, how big of an influence technology could have on the behavior. Could that do that, or would I mean like AI, right? Harari got mentioned again in this conversation, but Harari says that AI will know you so better that you wouldn't even know yourself in that way. So, do we see some of that flavor? Could we basically control that behavior or influence that behavior through the tech stack of today? And
Yeah.
if we are speaking of future, what do we mean by future? 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years? What's that? I want to start with you on that.
Yeah. So it's not a question of is the technology there. In my view, technology is there for the last 10, 15 years. So just take an example of Uber. Before Uber, would you imagine sending your family to with a stranger? Before Airbnb, would you imagine staying in somebody's place you don't know? So technology enabled that. Technology help you create that trust on that stranger who is on his private car and telling you that, okay, I'm going to ready to take you wherever you want to go. You will not be able to do that before Uber or Airbnb. So that means even technology change your behavior pattern, especially from the country I'm coming from. Hammad, obviously you can resonate with that.
Hmm.
We cannot even imagine thinking about sending our family with some stranger, but now we all do that all the time. And that's 10 years old technology I'm talking. Now we are a very, very different level. Now we our applications, our AI and machine learning is at a level where we really understand the potential dangers with travelers or whatever staying somewhere, and based on that we can take behavioral decisions and all. So in my view, we are on track. It's not about 6 months, it's continuously happening. Our behavior are continuously changing because of technology, and they will continue to change because of technology. So a very recent example, somebody came to me, very desperate, psychologically disturbed, emotionally disturbed, lone person. I'm talking about just 1 month back. And that person was not, so he had some traumas from childhood and all that. And he said, I have never discussed any of this with anyone. So not with me even. And he was very disturbed. I said, okay, no problem. I don't want you to, I don't want to encourage you to discuss it with me because you seem not comfortable discussing with me. Why don't you have a conversation with Claude? He said, what is Claude? I said, okay, it's a service. Go have, just create your account. I helped him install the application. I said, now go have a conversation. It's an AI chatbot. Just think it's not a chatbot. There's a human sitting on the other side. And but that human have no judgments. He's not going to reveal anything you are going to tell him. Just have a conversation. 3, 4 days. After 3, 4 days, he came back and said, I have the best friend of my life. I can talk about anything. He's really passionate. He's really compassionate about my feelings and he understands me now. So I think I don't need anyone to now know what I've been going through because this person even gives me suggestion how. So a total behavioral change. You modify a person immediately. So I think technology is already there. It's just going to
AJ,
get
yeah.
good or worse,
AJ, you
depending
and I,
on
we
your point
have
of view.
got an action item on this, right? This needs to be edited out. We're gonna cut this. Don't want to keep it. Don't want to keep it. Uh,
I have a strong opinion about this. I believe we might not be needing very strong opinion. We might not be needing human friends in 2 to 3 years.
Sam, please give us something to prove this. Sam, please.
um,
The whole
Yeah.
I
the,
guess set my
the
hands
whole
on that
humanity
comment.
the whole
Sam, come
humanity
on,
is
come on, come on.
dependent on you.
Yeah, so I read something recently that like there's uh, our as humans we tend to see things like black and white or binary, right? And so like there's often recently it's like, well, if you don't buy into all of the AI hype, then you are anti-AI. I just want to say right now it's like there is a wide range. And so what I'm going to say next is doesn't mean I'm anti-AI. Like that is a very big, broad, you know, base of things. AI does a lot of different things, and it's going to be good for some things. And so I completely agree with Umar that like technology has the potential to change our behavior. I think that Airbnb and Uber are great examples, partly because Uber has a really big dedicated team of behavioral scientists to figure out how do we get people to feel comfortable, how do we maximize tipping, how do we do all of these things and experiment, fail fast, and think about the psychology that goes into them. So there's those. And then there's things like the Segway, right? Or electronic medical records, right? Those technologies work. They are undeniable. They are functional. And the Segway is relegated for the most part to tours in major cities, right? We don't all have Segways, right? Many people are now adopting the scooters and things. And so while the technology is functional, there is always a behavioral component that drives that adoption and needs to be thought through in order for scaling and success. And I think to Umar's point, Airbnb, Uber did that very well.
Sam, you're part of the resistance now. We got to beat Skynet. That, if you peel Umar's skin, it will be T1000 there underneath. Right? I'm
So,
telling you now.
so just jump in. I'm consulting with a client at the moment who's one of their primary markets is doctors, and we had a call a couple of weeks ago, and I wasn't trying to be glib or trying to be funny, but I said, with what you're trying to do with this new CRM system, have you thought about how you can interface with pages? And everyone laughed at me, and I was like, if you're a 56-year-old doctor, you're not carrying your iPhone around with you, you're carrying a pager, because you've been carrying a pager around the wards for the last 30 years.
Yep.
And therefore, trying to get you to sign to your email address, to do email updates, or send you text messages is circumstance. You're probably not going to do that. Whereas if we can find their pager number and not harass them by pager, because obviously there's some ethical qualms with that, but send them a page now and again that says, hey, your certification is coming up, is up for due in 3 months. You need to do X, Y, and Z. Click here for the link, or click here to call us, or check your emails now. It becomes a different sort of outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And that gets back to Umar's point of like the leading and lagging indicators, right? And then also segmenting that, right? It's like who is this going to work for? Is it working for the right people? Is it not? And how do we think that through and iterate and pivot when we need to? I also wanted to touch on, so that's a great story, Umar. I'm very happy for your friend, right? That Claude gave them some benefit and everything. And there's a lot of really interesting issues with the AI therapist kind of model today, right? And some of them are around accountability for the most part, right? It's like, okay, you can give an agent a personality, you can have it answer questions. You may even be able to start putting in the guardrails that, prevent some of the glaring cases that we've seen where the chatbot actually encouraged an addict to go back to using the thing that they just quit, right? And so, or, gave advice for self-harm and things like that. So it's like, okay, there need to be guardrails, there need to be accountability, and things. And so again, to AJ's point, there's going to be people who are, I mean, thinking about healthcare, there are still people who want to go to their pharmacist and talk to their pharmacist every time they get a prescription. They don't even want it mailed to them. They want to be able to go physically somewhere, despite the fact that their life could be easier. The technology is there. It's very simple, but they want to have that human connection in some way. Maybe that will shift, over time as these tools get better, as things happen. And I think to AJ's point, right, like a 60-year-old doctor, is probably not going to change his behavior in 2 years. He's going to maybe just take that all the way to the grave and see what happens. So there's
Yeah,
a lot of
that's
interesting
possible.
I
nuance
also
to continue
think,
to think
sorry,
about.
See, all four of us, we started talking. This is interesting, right? I love this.
I also think, because I was first, so I was first. I also think about the concept of the family doctor. Now we're talking about this. I don't know why but there are still a large percent of the population in the Western world, and how it is for you guys out far east, right? That pride themselves on having a family doctor, and therefore are distraught when the family doctor decides to retire or move on to another practice or whatever. And for people of my generation, I don't really care. I care that I can get a doctor's appointment when I need to. But I can also see that the validity of the argument of saying, well, actually having a family doctor who knows you, who can provide dedicated care, being a very 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 good prospect in terms of how you see healthcare working in your community.
So the point is, obviously, whenever we are putting an argument, it does not mean it's absolutely across the board implemented. So basically it's indicating a direction. So 10 years back, maybe it was very difficult to even imagine what we are discussing right now. But as we move into future, the generation which is not ready to disconnect from humans is going to reduce day by day. It's not going to increase. That's obvious. A very recent case study I had from a Japanese case study. So an old lady was given a robotic pet, and she was alone. She had some family, but family was not ready to visit her on daily basis, so she was sick. They gave her a robotic pet, and she stayed with the robotic pet for a month or so. The pet was built with some emotions, some expressions, some feedback mechanisms, and everything. After a month, when her family came back, she said, "I don't need you anymore. I have this." So, I mean, we humans evolve, and it's very easy to evolve in this direction right now. And I'm talking about older generation. Younger generation is already in this direction. They don't really need a lot of human connection anymore.
So this is going to be maybe a generational shift. I understand that part, right? But in 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 my other life, right? So I basically work with, a lot of these call centers, et cetera, et cetera. So even the AI and every organization from Google, Microsoft, any of the bigger players, you basically pick them up. The conversation is on the AI. The way my organization or any of these organizations work in that space, they're working around how do we basically assist a human to get rid of repetitive tasks, right? So, what would be a primary repetitive kind of a thing? For example, you talk to a human, and I've actually spoken to, for example, I want to get into finance, right? And I end up being a call in marketing. So the marketing person picks the phone up and says, the first thing that person says is, okay, what's your name? What's your social? What's your address? All those things. And the moment that person routes me to, the next department, um, I have to basically go through it again. Now, I'm giving you another next level example. Let the example progress. And now I have to basically tell you something which I've already told you maybe when I called back 3 months to you. And now the repetitive task on the call center agent is primarily to go through all the notes and, go through that, etc., etc. Everything that AI is being used on this part is to get rid of these repetitive tasks, even just giving that call center agent the summary of whatever the previous record has been. But I think with this generation, and then the emergence of these high quality videos, right? So I think more these high quality videos and marketing messages are coming in. People have started to basically think, I want to basically see and mute a human being. So probably I think within this generation and maybe bit of half next generation, the human touch and human connection are gonna get more relevant because
You're an
you are not.
optimist.
Yeah, I'm part of the resistance. Umar.
or
So
or a realist, or
A
a
realist.
realist.
I say realist. I'm Sam.
You
no,
know, you're talking
I
about the
call
call
myself
center
part of
example.
resistance, right?
You're calling this call center example, and you're sharing this call center example now. And actually, we implemented behavior-based routing in 2009 without AI in Telenor. And
Yeah.
what happened there was when a customer calls the call center, the agent receives the call, obviously with all the information. Yeah, this customer is calling and all that, along with the suggestion what to tell this customer, how to greet this customer, what to sell to this customer, based on the usage patterns that customer have built on the network. And that is 2009 I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
implemented behavior-based routing. Uh, so now, and this was without AI.
Look, my point primarily is that this is going to basically live with us, at least this generation and maybe next generation. I don't know. Um, so I see that as a partner. I Yet, I have not seen any of the use cases where I could say, "Oh, this is crazy," right? Frankly, I asked someone, um, you know, that there was a conference happening, and the speakers primarily were from, these biggest farmers, Johnson Johnson's. I think Pfizer was there, and these experts. So I asked them, you're talking about AI and pharma and all those things. So what's the use case that I cannot relate to? The use cases that you were saying, they're all I mean, process optimization. It was all process optimization. But give me a use case which is science fiction level kind of a thing, right? Even not in the making, even that happened 10 years ahead. And they were not able to because I think we do not have that problem right now. But think about the problems as well, right? What problems do we have right now? Do we have a problem where we need to have a dog, which is robotic? I don't think this is a problem. Ideally, there has to be, imagine it could be a
It is
revenge
a
problem.
problem. It is
I
a problem.
Okay.
Look,
Why?
in an ideal world, Umar, in an ideal world,
No,
that
no, no, no,
old
not in
lady.
an ideal world. For the people, the elderly people who need some kind of support. And right now you have actual dogs walking those people. If you can replace it with a robotic dog, that's much more efficient. It can understand much more things. It can even transmit medical data real time to the doctor, what happened to this person. So, I mean, potentially,
But Umar, I think this conversation is primarily it becomes linear if you're talking with only two stakeholders, right? The old person, elderly, and the dog. But there is a third stakeholder into this, the family of that elderly, right? Which goes through a natural aging, having their own family, having their own day kind of a relationship. So the dog basically becomes a partner of that family and the elderly as well, right? So to what level do you so it's not just replacing that old lady might be angry on the family or something, but
no,
ideally I
okay.
think there has to be
But
For
a
but
this,
but but, but,
yeah.
so
but before you jump in, because I want to come to Sam, but before I let you speak, but I also want to say, for me, when I think of elderly people with dogs, I think of it's their reason to exist. And so if you take away that as a reason to exist, and you give them a toy. I'm just being simplistic for argument's sake. But you give them a robotic toy, say in a class as a toy, it then removes their will to live, and therefore they'll die sooner. And there's been so many studies about people who've stayed active in later life and have lived longer versus people who've resigned to the fact that they're just there now to die and therefore die sooner in comparison to other family members, and
right.
it's because it's that whole thing. Anyway, I'm gonna let Sam talk because I think Sam probably has lots of really interesting things to say, and this is again what we're all here, right? Sam.
And I think you're all touching on, from what I've seen, different parts of the same problem, right? Like it's like there are use cases, there are people out there for whom like a robotic dog would be ideal. That for calling a call center, like the AI would be ideal. There would be an entire different set of people who are kind of like halfway there. And we need to think through how do we get them to somewhere where this technology could help them. Then you've got a whole bunch of people who are probably like me, my dog is kind of my reason for existing. Like I'm never going to get there, right? I'm always going to have my dog, right? And so like there's a broad breadth of people. Where I come to it is how do we implement these changes? How do we get these tools to be successful at scale, right? And it's net like there's no silver bullet out there, right? Like, I mean, I think the closest thing might be our smartphones, right? Like everyone now has a smartphone.
Right.
But then again, people still have flip phones, right? And people are reverting back to, oh, well, I like the retro thing, all of that. So I'm coming at it as like, how do we think about these use cases, these tools, and operating at scale? How do we create human AI teams, right? Is that for the low performing quarter of your agents, right? In the high performing quarter, I think there is actually evidence, oh, maybe throwing an AI at them actually would reduce their benefit, right? Their performance. And we need to think very carefully about these segments, about these populations of people so that we are learning into how these things operate at scale and benefit at scale. Because there's a lot of unintended consequences out there, I think.
Absolutely. Folks, we are over and over. So, any parting thoughts on generally the topic, right? That commerce thought to check out anything. I'm not going to basically throw a question at you. Any parting thoughts? And I'm kind of
Yeah.
thinking also.
We need to do part 3, don't we? Because this has been This has been absolutely fascinating. And I think
Yeah.
again, this is why we do this format. This is why we brought you guys together, because I know that there would be a lot of very similar kind of viewpoints, but there'd also be lots of dark light and shade. And so for me, this has been absolutely the hour well spent, and I hope the people who end up listening to this also find that as well. And so yeah, so for me it's been absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to keep going,
Yeah,
albeit on another occasion, because you've all got lives.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you. My last thought, I wanted to come back to something that Umar said earlier about the culture that you built in your organizations. Like, I just want to say how special that sounds, right? And how like wonderful that culture is in the organizations. Like, I have seen bigger companies and other companies fail that was the critical failure, right? They couldn't get out of their own way. They couldn't enable their team to build on an experimental learning where learning is the goal, right? So I don't know. I want to applaud you for that and say that's pretty amazing.
Amazing, Umar.
Closing thoughts. Yeah, closing thoughts. So with respect to this session, obviously, I think there's always a room for episode 2 of this because the topic is so interesting and it can go into so many dimensions. With respect to the main topic, we were supposed to have conversation on, and we did not had a lot of conversation on that one, which
That's
was
what we do.
basically e-commerce.
Yeah.
So typically e-commerce or in e-commerce, we measure A/B testing. What I believe is that instead of focusing on what worked, we need to now focus on why it worked, because that's what the A/B testing is all about. It's always focused on what worked.
Cool.
Completely
I
agree.
think
Good point.
the technology itself, it kind of, takes us into different discussion topics, right? And this is what AJ and I, we try to have fun with the conversation. So I think the way I want to conclude this conversation, this podcast, is that I think AJ shares this feeling with me that we have been thinking about, bringing in Sam, Omar, 2 different perspectives, marrying them together, because that marriage is happening every second in commerce, right? And whoever is not doing that, missing that, a lot of things, missing business, missing reputation, etc., etc. Now, we would like to basically have another session. Maybe I cannot promise where the conversation takes us, but it will be around commerce. I promise you that. And thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much, Umar and AJ. Perpetual thanks to you for making this happen, to stick around, etc. And folks, thank you very much for watching this. We're gonna keep bringing you good stuff. We're gonna keep bringing you people who have done this, who have got the correct credentials. Reach out to Sam, and we will be posting this. Reach out to Sam on his LinkedIn, to Omar on his LinkedIn, any of the services if you feel are relevant to you and you feel that could make your business better, please do that. Thank you very much, and peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.